It's 24 minutes away from 7 o'clock. Welcome back to Sharp in the Morning. We're going to get a little intellectual here. And the reason why is because I heard some people discussing the Supreme Court in relation to SB1070. Yesterday they decided to hear the governor's basically the governor asking that the injunction against SB1070, parts of the law that a federal judge said cannot go into effect. They're taking up essentially the governor's case, and they're saying, okay, we'll listen to what you have to say about this. This does not settle SB 1070, and to help explain all this is Brian Bergin, an attorney at Rose Law, who's been working on SB 1070. It's been more than a year now, hasn't it been, Brian?
Yeah, it's been around for
turn your mic on. There you go. You're all right.
Yeah, we're past the 1 year mark on this. Actually, we're probably closing in on about a year and a half.
Wow. So am I right in what I said there? I mean, it didn't come out right because I'm not a lawyer, but...
No, you're right. All the Supreme Court said yesterday was, we've accepted your petition. We'd like to have you come in and we'll hear your case. So there's been no decision rendered on the underlying merits of the case. It's simply the Supreme Court saying, okay, this is interesting to us. We'd like to speak to the issue. Come on in, submit your briefs, present your argument, and we'll make some decisions.
But by them saying that, they're actually saying a lot, aren't they?
I think so. They take a very small percentage of cases. They get thousands of petitions every year. Please review this case, and they only take a handful of them. And for the court to say that they want to review the SB 1070 ruling, I think, is very significant. That means that there's at least 4 justices who think that this is an issue that needs to be decided by the highest court. Mm-hmm. In light of the fact that you're getting a number of rulings out of the various courts around the country, that in some sense there's some harmony, and in another sense there's a lot of discord. So this is why we have a Supreme Court, which is to give some degree of finality to these larger constitutional issues. So come about April time, they're going to hear some oral argument and probably render a decision by I'd say early summer. And
on the injunctions. Correct?
Yes. The issue that's going to be framed for the court was, did the district court commit any errors when it enjoined and prevented from coming into effect certain areas of SB 1070? And then the Ninth Circuit affirmed that and said, yes, the injunction should stand. So the Supreme Court is going to be reviewing that specific issue. But the Supreme Court isn't simply going to take this up to answer very narrow questions like that. I think we're going to hear some very clear statements as to what the Supreme Court believes in terms of what is the role of the federal government vis-a-vis the role of the state, particularly with respect to SB 1070 and immigration law.
So for you, this means essentially you're reviewing your favorite restaurants in Washington because you're going to be there eventually,
yes,
arguing this case because you're part of this case, but you're not part of this part of the case, right?
Well, we represent Sheriff Deaver through the Border Sheriff's Project. And he has been a very vocal advocate and an amicus in this case. So we've submitted amicus briefing at the Ninth Circuit, and earlier in the Supreme Court, we articulated the reasons why Sheriff Deaver believes that it was appropriate for the Supreme Court to undertake review of this issue. We've taken an approach that isn't necessarily been voiced as loudly by other parties, and so we're hopeful that what we've said and will continue to say will influence the court.
What I found interesting was that Justice Elena Kagan has recused herself from participating in this case at all, presumably because of her work on it when she was Solicitor General.
Yeah, is someone who is defending the law, is that a positive for you, Brian?
I'm not really sure that it has any effect. The fact is now there's one less justice who's going to consider the case.
And if it's a tie, 4-4, that means the injunction stands.
That's right. So the state's burden still is to get 5 votes.
Okay.
And court watchers will probably say that they didn't expect that Justice Kagan was going to be likely to be in favor of the state. So I'm not sure that that's a vote that the state lost.
No, there's a lot more riding on this. The overall case, there's a lot more riding on this than just simply SB 1070, just simply Russell Pierce's law, just simply, the cop on the street even. This is all about states' rights and the ability of the federal government to pick and choose the laws that it wants states to support, federal laws that it wants the states to support, which, for a long time, I mean, the FBI has asked for the help of local law enforcement in catching bank robbers and kidnappers. And it seems like, is that an argument you guys are using at all, that, the federal government just really can't pick and choose the laws it wants states to support and not support?
Yeah, you've said it well. That's one of the main arguments in this case, is that SB1070 doesn't run afoul of or contrary to federal immigration law. SB1070 has actually been designed to facilitate and enhance the law enforcement provisions of federal immigration law. One of the arguments we've addressed in this is the fact that why is it that Arizona somehow is offending this federal scheme by attempting to enforce the federal law, while at the same time the federal government isn't taking the same action against the sanctuary jurisdictions? Aren't they similarly interfering with the federal immigration laws? So there seems to be a bit of disingenuity there. One of the other arguments we've made, and the one that is really key to Sheriff Deaver's position on this, is one of the main thrusts of the Ninth Circuit argument was that SB 1070 stands to interfere with international relations. There have been amicus briefs filed by the governments of Costa Rica and a committee of the United Nations Human Rights Council or something like that. We just believe it's simply inappropriate for the federal courts of the United States to be providing such significant deference to foreign lands when it comes to, frankly, defending the state of Arizona.
It's our laws.
Right.
They should be concerned with, not other countries' laws. It's just crazy. So this could actually be a much larger ruling and create a lot of what do you call it when you get the history of
precedent?
Ruling? Precedent. It could set precedent as far as the 10th Amendment goes. In concerning states' rights.
I think so, and that's likely one of the reasons that the Supreme Court wants to review this case, is not simply for the reason of resolving the narrow issue of SB 1070, but to provide some larger governance to courts and legislatures around the country as to really what role can the states play in fields where the federal government may also have spoken.
Wow. It would not surprise me at all that if the Supreme Court overturns the Ninth Circuit and allows Arizona to enforce all parts of 1070, every state in this country will be drafting similar legislation.
Well,
right now there are 3 others.
Maybe not every state. Massachusetts.
It would not surprise me, though, that you're going to see, whether it passes in the legislatures, maybe one thing, but it wouldn't surprise me if every state at least made an attempt to do some sort of legislation on that basis.
We're talking with Brian Bergin. Bob Bennett there, of course, is a former attorney. We're talking to Brian Bergin, who's a partner at Rose Law and has been working on SB 1070 for more than a year now, about what the Supreme Court said yesterday. We'll get more into that, but one of the things you brought up that I want to hit after we take a quick break, the fact that the federal government wants to pick and choose what laws the states can uphold and help enforce. Yet on this one, they don't seem to want help, and maybe the reason behind that, if you don't mind getting into that, and I think we might all know the answer, but I'd like to hear it out loud. Stick around at Sharp in the Morning.
550 KFYI, Sharp in the Morning.
9 minutes away from 7 o'clock at Sharp in the Morning on News Talk 550 KFYI, and Brian Bergin from Rose Law is our guest this morning because the Supreme Court yesterday agreed to hear whether or not portions of SB 1070 should continue to be enjoined. Susan Bolton, who's the federal judge here in Phoenix, ruled as the case is moving forward, and of course there's a case for the federal government against Arizona, there's a case from the ACLU and some other groups, saying that our law is unconstitutional and that they'll lead to racial profiling, all this stuff. So really what the Supreme Court did yesterday is they said, we're going to go ahead and decide whether or not what Susan Bolton, the judge here in Phoenix, did is okay, that she stopped parts of the law from going forward. And if you don't mind, just to refresh in our memory, what parts of the law were enjoined, Brian?
Well, there were a number of pieces of the law that were enjoined, but really the most significant part of the law, and the one that's garnered the most attention was the provision that requires an officer, if he has reasonable suspicion upon stopping someone for another reason, that they may be in the country illegally, to ask for proof of citizenship. That was really the key piece of the law that has been spoken about throughout the court proceedings. There are some other ancillary provisions involving whether certain categories of immigrants are, if they are not holding the papers with them that they're required to hold under federal law, whether that can be a separate state crime, and some other nuanced provisions. But the one that gets the most attention is the instruction to law enforcement that if you have this reasonable suspicion, that you need to follow up and determine and confirm citizenship.
And the police don't have discretion on this. They're required to do it.
If they have suspicion.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, well, if you feel like it, you can. No, they're required to.
Yeah. In retrospect, do you think that might have been a stumbling block in this? Should it have been more of a, if the officer feels there's reasonable suspicion, and he's so inclined he can do this, instead of basically spelling it out that the cop has to do it?
Well, that's actually the whole point of SB 1070, is to remove that discretion. And in large part, the law was established as a combat against sanctuary jurisdictions, where those officers simply had a written or unwritten directive not to ask those questions. SB 1070 strips away the sanctuary policies and says you have to do this. You must enforce the law.
The $64,000 question for me, or thanks to the Federal Reserve, now the $640,000 question for me is, we were talking earlier about the fact that the federal government essentially wants states to only enforce the laws, the federal laws that they want them to enforce, and this happens to be one of the laws that they don't want us to enforce, at least for this current administration. Essentially what they're saying is, we don't want to enforce the laws on the book, the federal laws. That's what they're saying, aren't they?
That is what they're saying. And again, that was really part of the driving force behind SB 1070, is the Arizona legislature looked at it and said, the federal government is doing such a woeful job of enforcing its own policies, likely because of
political reasons.
Because of policies, coming from higher up. That the state is going to come in and enforce the existing laws on the books. I mean, it really is about as simple as that, is to try to get the administration off the dime.
So instead of being able to say they were lazy and didn't want to enforce this law, so we're going to take it up now, the federal government, at least this administration, has doubled down and says, not only do we not feel like enforcing the law, we just don't want to enforce the law because it gets in the way of policy.
That's right. That's right. And
that's a heck of a thing.
It is. In some respects, they're saying, we're really not going to help you, Arizona law enforcement, and we don't want you to help yourselves either. And that really puts Arizona law enforcement in a pretty precarious position.
So what do you, if you were a betting man, Brian, and I'm not saying you're not, I don't want to cast aspersions on you. I'm
a very betting man. Yeah.
How could you not be deterring it? How do you think this is going to go? Do you think the Supreme Court is going to say, as you suggested, probably by early summer, are they going to say, you know what, at least several of the key provisions shall not be enjoined, and Arizona can move forward with enforcing the law as written?
Yeah, I really have a lot of hope, based on the strength of the arguments that have been presented, at least to this point, that I think the Supreme Court is going to look at it and say, this really is overreaching by the federal government. States need to have some degree of control of their own borders and their own border policies. And Arizona's effort here is reasonable, and it doesn't interfere with overriding federal laws. So I think in large part it's going to come down to one or two swing votes on this thing. But I've got a lot of hope that SB 1070 is going to get enforced, and people are going to see that it's not this great boogeyman that it's been made out to be.
Right. Awesome. Hey, Brian, thanks for coming by. Appreciate it.
Oh, anytime.
In the rain, too. Nice raincoat, by the way. That's pretty cool. I like that styling, London foggish kind of thing.
I wear it even when it's not raining.
It's a good look. Yeah. All right, Brian Bergin there from Rose Law Group. Thank you once again. We're going to get out of here. The Nearly Famous Barry Young Show coming up next with Barry and Michelle Larson and Andrew Babinski. He's awfully quiet this morning. We'll see you after the news tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. here on 550 KFYI.